Right, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here. We've got a super crowd for Dr. Anactoria Clarke, who is our guest speaker today. Many of you know Anactoria, and she's just fresh from teaching the Underworld Gods course at this year's summer school. So a little bit about Anactoria, if you don't know. She is a senior lecturer with the Open University. And we've just been through this before you all arrived. She has two bachelor's degrees, one in English and philosophy and the other in classics and creative writing. Master's degrees in classics, Egyptology and creative writing, and then two PhDs, the first on Gothic literature and the second in classics on the subject of centaurs. So, she's an absolute legend. Today, Anactoria is going to talk to us about Tiresias in ancient Greek drama. She's called the talk, Here Comes Tiresias Again, the Theban Prophet's Recurrence in Athenian Tragedy. Thank you, Anactoria. Over to you.
Oh, thanks, Helen. I should also say I'm HM Classics Academy spooky child. So, and when you said lots of people know me, I feel like I should always follow that with sorry.
You've been
Um, but thank you for being here. All right, so I should disclose that this was from a conference paper that was about the Euripides play Phoenician Women. It's expanded a little into a chapter that's coming out in an Edith Hall co-edited book on studies in Phoenician women. But what's really interesting and what's really interested me about the figure of Tiresias is how he changes through epic and tragedy, and to kind of get to the Tiresias we get in Phoenician Women. So if it has a sort of slight Phoenician Women slant, that's why, because that's the edited collection and I had to slant it that way. But there's some reasonable stuff in here, I think. Anyhow, let me just share my slides. We don't have too many slides. I will make them as easy on the eye as I can. So we just slideshow from the beginning. Hopefully those look okay. Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, so Tiresias is an emblematic prophet figure included in the dramatis personae of ancient Greek tragedies, particularly those plays set in Thebes, since his prophetic identity is linked to the health and the fortune of the city. He's utilised by the major Greek tragedians, albeit in different ways. These build on and augment the principal characteristics of his prophecies and nature have been established in the Odyssey and developed in the lyric poetry of Stesichorus. While some aspects of his portrayal remain stable across diverse texts, each tragedian privileges slightly different features, displaying invention and flexibility in his characterization, with particular innovation and change occurring in Euripides' Phoenician Women. So what I'm going to do is contrast his portrayals and highlight what remains stable and exactly what's altered by each dramatist, charting these alterations in order to show light on how his role in Phoenician Women innovates. Move the slide along. Okay, so it's not possible to be entirely certain about the chronology of these changes, since dates for the first performances of Sophocles, Antigone, and Oedipus Tyrannos are uncertain, and even the Bacchae, produced posthumously by Euripides' son in 405 BCE, must have been written at an unknown earlier date. But the alterations in Tiresias' portrayal demonstrate the changeable, shifting nature of the literary and stage character. Tiresias' identity, Habib states, is a process of historical constructs, reflecting a simultaneous involvement in and detachment from the contingent socio-historical pressures that different contexts put on his inherited literary personality, and those of whom on those of the characters to whom he prophesies. The flexibility in his portrayal is a result of the way in which traditional mythical situations and events are shaped according to contingent and contemporary psychosocial preoccupations. So discrete aspects of Tiresias' characterization were established long before drama. The narrative of Tiresias' transformation into a woman, which does not seem to have interested the tragedians, I don't know why, is attributed in Hesiod's Melampodia, a poem about various seers. After seeing snakes coupling on Mount Kyllini and injuring them, Tiresias was first changed into a woman and later back into a man. He also addressed a speech to Zeus on how he regretted his own longevity, since Zeus had ordained that he would live for 7 generations. Other epics featured Tiresias, especially those centered on Thebes. In the Epigoni, his daughter Manto was sent to Delphi to be dedicated as a tithe before experiencing further adventures, some of which appealed to the later tragedy authors. She was the mother of Alcmaeon, of the 2 children with whom he was concerned in Euripides' Alcmaeon in Corinth, performed in the same group with Iphigenia in Aulis and Bacchae in 405 BCE, and possibly also in Sophocles' Alcmaeon. More familiar is Tiresias' appearance in the Nekia episode of the Odyssey, which is probably pertinent if you've managed to see the film. And although this narrative is clearly chronologically positioned after his death, and therefore after the mythological events relating to Thebes that the tragedians explore, the Nekia establishes his liminality. Translators have Circe refer to him as a disembodied spirit, as a ghost, but the Greek is more specific in highlighting that he is only one of the dead whom Persephone has permitted to retain his memory and his skills from life. Nobody else, just him. Habib illuminates the figure of Tiresias across texts, highlighting that he is in essence a liminal individual mediating between humans and gods, male and female, the blind and the seeing, past, present and future, and the terrestrial world and the underworld. So Mackin's describes him here as more alive than dead, having no need of sacrificial blood to give Odysseus the information he needs. Tiresias uses his prophetic powers to tell Odysseus how to expiate his offence against the gods. He does not prophesy solely in relation to the immediate matter in hand and the first stage of the journey, however, but he demonstrates his foresight by anticipating the further dangers that Odysseus will face. These include not only the suitors besieging his household, whom he will encounter on his return, but aspects of the journey towards Ithaca, such as the need to avoid harming the cattle of Helios, which his men do subsequently eat. Tiresias anticipates worst-case scenarios, implying that they are inevitable. He presents these dangers as conditional on the behaviour of Odysseus and his men, but he also outlines, despite some oracular ambiguity in his language, what action should be taken when what he has warned occurs. Mackin's describes Tiresias' behaviour as constituting both warning and prophecy, with prophecy and the treatment of inevitability coming immediately after the warning has not been heeded. In his dealings with Odysseus, Tiresias offers a summary of what Odysseus will face, very explicitly in the case of the suitors and Odysseus' death, and we see these 2 modes of admonitory discourse in the same speech, which highlights what Mackin's terms as Tiresias' helpfulness. This episode in Book 11 of the Odyssey also reinforces why Odysseus must subsequently return to Circe, despite Circe having sent him to the underworld to receive instructions on his journey home. Not in the film, spoiler alert. It's not Tiresias' job to give detailed instructions on the journey, but instead to reveal how to atone for his crimes against Poseidon and how to avoid incurring the wrath of another god. And his prophecies address acts that transgress boundaries, his liminality allowing him to see the will of the gods and the actions required of humans to repair any damage in the relationship they have with divinity. He does not perform the straightforward functions of a prophet here in Homer that we see with someone like Calchas in the Iliad, who states exactly what's needed, but he instead gives an impression of human agency by including alternatives and consequences. The cyclic epic Telogony referred to Tiresias' prophecies to Odysseus by describing Odysseus carrying out the sacrifices Tiresias had prescribed in Ithaca, and in Thesprotia to appease Poseidon. This difference between the 2 prophets is partially explained by Tiresias' absence from the Trojan War narrative, in which he plays no part. For each episode in epic narrative, the specific hero, the aristocrat, sailor, or military general, needs to consult the best prophet, who may well be the one most locally available. The Nekia episode of the Odyssey was reimagined on the Athenian stage in Aeschylus' exciting Psychogogoi, or Ghost Raiders, as one of the 4 fragments confirms. It's so fragmentary, it breaks my heart. The chorus consisted of people who lived around a lake with access to the underworld, most likely the Acherusian lake in Thesprotia, who worshipped Hermes as their ancestor. The impact the tragedy made may be indicated by the subject matter of the lost Thesprotians by the middle comedy dramatist Alexis, which included an invocation to Hermes, escorter of souls and the moon. So Aeschylus' chorus address a spine-chilling anapestic instruction to Odysseus, preserved on papyrus, telling him to stand on the edge of the lake and slash the windpipe of a sacrificial animal so that its blood runs down for the dead to drink, while summoning Earth and Hermes, escort of the dead, and Zeus of the underworld, to send up the souls of the dead from the streams of the Styx. Although we do not know the identity of the other characters in this tragedy, Tiresias delivered a prophecy in iambic trimeters, which included these 4 lines. They're in translation, so they won't be in iambic trimeters, unfortunately. For a heron in flight will strike you from above with its dung when it opens its bowels, and from this the barb of a sea creature will rot your aged, hairless skin. So this characterization of Tiresias continues the theme of unhappy prophecies and provides a useful bridge between the Tiresias of Homer and the dramatic portrayals of the seer, as well as establishing the prophet as a site of innovation for tragedians. It has been suggested that Aeschylus lends the Nekia a diametrically opposite meaning from Homer, which hinges upon the ambiguity of Odysseus's use of exalos, which can mean either from the sea or away from the sea. This ambiguity, the argument goes, was exploited in the Telegony, when Telegonus shoots and kills Odysseus with an arrow made with a stingray spine, whilst Odysseus is on dry land. The Odyssey's Tiresias predicts a peaceful and gentle death, and implies that Odysseus in old age will be healthy and prosperous. Tiresias' speech in the Aeschylean tragedy, however, tells of a rather different death, whilst maintaining the key points of the epic. So whilst this prophecy primarily focuses the spectator upon the diminished status and dignity given to Odysseus's end, it should also be understood as part of a later tragic tendency to underscore the less elevated aspects of Odysseus's character, experience, and behaviour, and introduces the audience to the notion of a more flawed and limited human. It also establishes Tiresias as a figure who can be deployed flexibly to demonstrate those flaws and limits. The sparseness of the evidence for this play obscures how Tiresias might have escalated his prophecy to predict such an ignominious death, and whether his characterization in the play is purely antagonistic or a result of disrespect on Odysseus' part, a disrespect we can see shown by other interlocutors of the play. But he is the mouthpiece for such a diversion from the Homeric narrative is indicative of the playwright's creative use of his persona, reputation, and skills for their own dramatic ends. So besides the entrance to the underworld, the location in which Tiresias is most commonly found is Thebes. He is said to have died and been buried at a Boeotian spring mentioned by Pindar, which flowed near the main highway between northern Greece and Thebes. Strabo reports that Pindar located the spring near Lake Copias, where it flowed at the foot of the mount. Tilphosius near Haliartus and Alacomene, in the vicinity of which was Tiresias' tomb, as well as the temple of Apollo Tilphosius, implying the close association between the seer and this god. So in Pindar's Nemean 1, the Syracusan victor in chariot racing being celebrated, Chromios, traced his ancestry to Heracles, so Pindar chooses a story of Heracles to honour him. The hero's birth in Thebes is narrated, and Amphitryon summoned his neighbour, the supreme prophet of Zeus Most High, the truth-telling Tiresias, to predict the baby's future. When the honorand is a Theban, like Strepsiades, the Pancratian champion praised in Isthmian 7, Pindar includes in his list of great Theban forebears Tiresias with his wise counsels. In Phoenician women, the prophet must be Tiresias because he is inextricably linked to the land and the myths of Thebes. The location of his celebrated sanctuary of Apollo Ismenios, with its observatory for inspecting the movements of birds outside the city walls. He may well have appeared in Euripides' Alcmene, set in Thebes, to deliver a speech which is clarified to Amphitryon that he should not immolate his wife because she had been impregnated by Zeus. Tiresias is included conspicuously and name-labelled in a recently published vase painting illustrating the play. A precious papyrus published in 1977 offers a fascinating insight into the role Tiresias already played in archaic poetry's narration of the story, dramatised in Euripides' Phoenician Women. The surviving text opens with the mother of Eteocles and Polynices, responding to prophecies delivered by Tiresias, who has apparently predicted that she will witness her sons slain by each other. She hopes that Apollo will not accomplish this disaster, but affirms that if young men lie beside one another in death, may the end of hateful death at once be mine before I ever see these lamentable, tearful things, to my sorrows, my sons dead in the palace or the city captured. She continues in a sense of arbitration conducted in the presence of the seer and both sons. No, come, my sons, obey my words, my dear children, for thus do I reveal the outcome for you, that one of you have the palace and dwell by the spring of Dirce, and the other have the flocks and all the gold of his dear father and depart. He, in the shaking of lots, is the first to obtain his portion, thanks to the fates. For this, I think, might be your release from the evil doom in the warning of the holy seer, if truly the son of Cronos means to guard the family and city of Lord Cadmus, putting off for a long time the misfortune which is fated for the royal family. So said the noble lady, speaking with gentle words, checking her sons from strife in the palace, and along with her Tiresias, interpreter of portents, and her sons obeyed. The Lacuno's passage which follows may have recounted the sons' acceptance of the queen's proposal and how they cast lots and Polynices lost, but received compensation of sheep, horses, gold, and treasure. Tiresias then speaks up, forecasting in detail what must happen now that Polynices was the loser in the shaking of lots. Polynices must go to Argos with his compensatory gifts in accordance with fate. King Adrastartus will welcome him and give him his beautiful daughter in marriage. Tiresias expresses fear that Eteocles will resent the livestock and treasure given to Polynices and bring disaster on the city and grief to his mother. And this speech is followed by a narrative describing Polynices' journey from Thebes to the Peloponnese via Eleusis, the Isthmus, Corinth, and Cleone on the very edges of the Argolid. Stesichorus' version seems to have informed that in Statius, but it also importantly anticipates Euripides' Phoenician women in making the mother figure attempt to avert the fatal conflict between her sons, although she's not named in the surviving papyrus fragments. She might have borne one of the names of other women associated with Oedipus, such as Epicaste, Euigenea, Euiclea, or Astimedusa. Nor is it clear that the sons are products of incest. Oedipus' mother wife is implied or stated in the epic tradition to have killed herself without issue early in the course of their marriage. Children of incest first appear in our extant sources in a fragment of Pherecydes of Samos in the first half of the 5th century, but they are not Polynices, Eteocles, Antigone, and Ismene. They are born to Oedipus, according to Pherecydes, from a later non-incestuous marriage. The notion of the lots in Stesichorus does not appear in Euripides, but may have informed the prominence of lot imagery in Aeschylus 7 against Thebes. Stesichorus does not apparently use the notion of Oedipus' curse on his sons, which was central in the tragic renditions of the story. In Euripides' play, Jocasta never encounters Tiresias, and does not seem to have received a prophecy from him. Euripides prefers to use Tiresias to motivate the self-immolation of Menoicus. The lyric and tragic versions also differ in their theological outlook. Stesichorus' mother thinks Apollo and fate are involved, wherein Euripides is the offence against Ares and his guardian serpent that comes back to literally bite the Theban Spartoi. Yet there are clear lines of continuity between Stesichorus' characterization of the seer and his Homeric presentation. He's helpful, outlining alternatives, supporting the mother and encouraging her sons to accept a third proposition and compromise, and again describing what will happen if the approved action is not performed. This supports the aspects of human agency suggested in the Odyssey, that Tiresias sees the future not just as a fixed and ineluctable destiny, but as a fixture of the fulfillment of divine will and human choices. However, whilst there still appears to be some element of free choice attributed to the humans he advises, that there is always the anticipated outcome, most tragic or difficult, perhaps demonstrates the predictability of human nature. In both Homer and Stesichorus, Tiresias is trusted implicitly, renowned for truth-telling, and despite unhappy prophecies, the blame is not laid at his feet. There's more evidence of Aeschylus' use of Tiresias in 7 against Thebes, first performed in 476 BCE. It covers the same mythological material as the Phoenician women, the conflict between the sons of Oedipus, and the survival of Thebes. The audience sees again the helpfulness of Tiresias directly as a consequence of his role as a warner first before he becomes prophet. So whilst Tiresias is not present as a character in the play, he's referenced in the prologue delivered by Eteocles, who clearly respects the prophet. But now, as the prophet states, that shepherd of fowl who with infallible skill observed birds of augury with his eyes, his ears and his mind without using fire, this man, the master of this kind of prophecy, says that a great plan for an attack by the Achaeans upon the city is being discussed this night. Tiresias, the one who observes the birds, and the seer who can discern the future from their utterances, has prophesied an attack by the Achaeans. Eteocles does not doubt the veracity of this warning and orders his citizens and soldiers to guard the walls of Thebes. Tiresias is believed and his warning acted upon, although this does not save Eteocles and Polynices. It does, however, save the city, which is always his primary concern. However, what happens in later plays featuring prophets is that usually the seer in question, whether it's Tiresias, Cassandra, or Calchas, is either disbelieved or ignored, and that's because the ruler or the power holder is failing in their duties. The figure of the wise Egyptian Theonoi in Euripides' Helen is an exception here. But nevertheless, in no way, no matter how severe a questioning and how skeptical the reaction to the prophecy, is the prophet ever proved wrong. So this is understood by the audience, who are placed physically and cognitively in the position of the gods watching, and it heightens the dramatic tension by ensuring that they know what will happen. What is left to be portrayed are the hubristic actions of the rulers in order to make the inevitable the full force of the tragic prophecy, and their treatment of the prophet highlights their arrogance and their flaws. The Sophoclean plays in which Tiresias appears, Oedipus Tyrannos and the Antigone, cannot be exactly dated, although they are likely to have been written and performed between Aeschylus' play and those by Euripides, to which I will return shortly. Regardless of whether the ending of the Seven Against Thebes is an interpolation, as has often been tendentiously assumed, the action of Antigone picks up the story at approximately the point where the Aeschylean play ends. Tiresias' twin roles as a warner, where advice is given to overcome the wrong action of a ruler, and a mantis who prophesies doom, are clearly delineated. Tiresias is, again, always on the side of Thebes. He comes unannounced to offer advice in the role of warner, and despite the acknowledgement that Creon has previously saved Thebes through following Tiresias' advice, he blames Creon directly for the position that the city is in. It is your will that has put this plague upon the city. However, once Creon has disparaged him and ignored his advice, Tiresias segues directly into the role of Mantis. In his appeal to Creon, he demonstrates knowledge of the ruler's character and of how he views the world, with the assumption that human agency can still offer a way out. However, the Mantis, often sent for rather than voluntarily arriving, prophesies that there is no way out. Tiresias moves from a reasonable and supportive demeanour, giving Creon time and opportunity to take his advice, to participating in a furious argument, in which Creon accuses Tiresias of prophesying for financial gain, and Tiresias, in response, prophesies with finality. He warns that Creon is pushing him to reveal knowledge that should remain secret, and therefore the opportunity for Creon to save himself is no longer there. There are the arrows which, like an archer, since you provoke me, I have shot in anger at your heart, sure arrows whose sting you will not escape. Mackin's feels Tiresias' prophecies in the majesty of his anger, matching the vituperative utterances of Creon and denigrating his character, just as Creon has insulted his. There is, unlike in other texts where prophets have secret knowledge of divine affairs, such as Phineas in Apollonius's Argonautica, who is punished for revealing information to mortals, there is no divine revenge for Tiresias prophesying secrets. He has the gods' permission, the audience must acknowledge, to move to the prediction of an unavoidable disaster that is about to unfold. Mackin's here suggests that he prophesies out of revenge, and as such works as a weapon of the gods. So Sophocles' picture of Tiresias in Oedipus Tyrannos is consistent with that in the Antigone. The ruler Oedipus refuses to follow the advice of the prophet, but here it is because he doubts that Tiresias has access to the truth. There is again conflict, although the play does not begin in this way. The chorus suggests that Tiresias be summoned, but Oedipus has already done so twice. Here, because Tiresias is immediately a mantis, having been summoned, the audience would expect him to move straight to the pronouncement of harsh truths. He's reluctant to reveal his knowledge and prevaricates while still dropping hints. I shall give pain neither to you nor to myself. Why do you question me in vain? You cannot learn from me. But when Oedipus goads him, he tells all that is needed to know, and that is Oedipus himself that is the polluter of the city. However, Oedipus does not understand, despite historically being Tiresias' rival in diagnosing the ills of the city. He has been a responsible monarch, having sent Creon to Delphi and summoning Tiresias. Yet Oedipus does not appreciate that he possesses neither the skills nor the status to serve as an intermediary between humans and gods. Tiresias could again be said to be driven to divulge his prophecies out of revenge for being slighted and offers a warning. Yes, things will come of themselves even if I veil it in silence. He is accused once again of profiteering in association with Creon, as Oedipus opines that Tiresias' inability to save the city from the Sphinx proves that he's a charlatan. Indeed, Apedius uses the word magos to describe Tiresias here, a very different address to the usual prophet or oracle, expressing his disgust and disbelief at Tiresias' art, a Sophoclean innovation in the use of this word to convey the notion of trickster, as well as the traditional sense of an individual engaged in court political intrigue. Oedipus' accusation is hugely disrespectful and receives from Tiresias as weighty a refutation and condemnation as he can muster. Here there is no benign helpfulness from Tiresias, and there is no possibility of remedy for Oedipus. The ruler is hubristic and thinks that he knows much more than the prophet. He levels at Tiresias the accusation, "You are blind in your ears, in your mind, and in your eyes," unaware of the darkly ironic aspect of this insult, and that there is no political motivation behind the prophet's utterance. Oedipus will deprive himself of the throne single-handedly. So in both Sophoclean plays, Tiresias is insulted by the rulers who seek the truth he knows, and he's remorseless in his prophecy. As always, he sides with Thebes, concerned about its health and longevity, and he's always vindicated. But Sophocles makes him just as proud and quick to respond in anger as those who insult him. The role he plays reveals both his own uncompromising and trenchant response to provocation and the hubris and weaknesses of those rulers. Their choices and treatment of him are followed by terrible, inescapable consequences. So these earlier literary and dramatic appearances of Tiresias may have been in the minds of some of Euripides' audience when they watched Phoenician women. So those who knew Stesichorus, who was a popular and familiar poet in 5th century Athens, might have been surprised that Jocasta never mentions him in her prologue. It is Eteocles who suggests summoning him in dialogue with Creon, and the surprising detail that it would be better for the seer to confer with Creon, since he, Eteocles, has recently criticised his prophetic art to his face, so that Tiresias was angry with him. No full explanation is given, but the audience will no doubt have been reminded of previous plays, such as those by Sophocles, in which Tiresias has been insulted as a fraud to his face by Eteocles' father and uncle. So Tiresias' entry follows its customary lines. He's accompanied by a younger, sighted person. In Oedipus Tyrannus, it's a boy. Here it's his daughter, whose name is known from other sources to be the prophetess Manto. He is portrayed as aged, infirm as well as blind, with knees that are growing weary. She carries his tools of prophecy, the lot tablets, which prove and support his offstage ornithomantic reading. He has been summoned by Creon, who Oedipus said urged him to consult the seer in Oedipus Tyrannus. But Euripides inserts a new detail. He arrives not from his Theban sanctuary, but from Athens, the land of the Erytheids, where he had recently assured a glorious victory to the sons of Cecrops over the invader Eumolpus. Euripides is here playing something of an intertextual game, since he had dramatized this victory in his own Erytheus, performed around 422 BCE, probably to celebrate the Erytheion temple, although the fragments do not suggest that Tiresias was involved in that tragedy. But in Phoenician women, the detail perhaps implies that he had exerted agency in securing the outcome, rather than committing an inevitable fate, although his language is somewhat slippery. I made the Cecropids victorious. He's carrying a scepter, which he also does in Odysseus Nekia, but additionally wears a golden crown gifted to him by the Athenians, demonstrating not that he's been honoured by Thebes, demonstrating that he has been honoured by Thebes' historic enemy and rival. For the Athenian audience, this pleasingly affirms their own good sense in opposition to what will be demonstrated to be Theban foolishness in Creon. Athenian playwrights like to bring famous Thebans and Argives into their own mythical orbit. Orestes in Aeschylus Eumenides, Heracles in Euripides Heracles Mad, and Oedipus in Sophocles Oedipus at Colonus. At this point, Tiresias remains on good terms with Creon and tells him that the land has been diseased for a long time. The pre-existing tension between Eteocles and Tiresias isn't fully explained. Perhaps it suggested that Tiresias had warned him about refusing to share the power with Polynices, a very different situation than the one portrayed in Aeschylus 7 against Thebes. His own explanation is that the enmity began earlier. He had tried to intervene when Oedipus cursed his sons for keeping him without privileges in confinement. I did and said everything I could, but I came to be hated by the sons of Oedipus. This prepares the ground for his affirmation that he remains aligned with the welfare of Thebes, and you, poor city, will be destroyed together with your soldiery unless someone pays heed to my words. He tells Creon, for the sake of the health and future of Thebes, the family of Oedipus need to be exiled, as they are under a divine curse arising, um, resulting from the Laius Jocasta Oedipus triangle. So here Tiresias demonstrates both his knowledge of the will of the gods and his commitment to the preservation of Thebes through his prophecies. Tiresias, however, is a pragmatic prophet, one who's seen enough of human nature, or perhaps enough of the future, to know that his advice will not be heeded. This is where he moves from being a warner to a prophet. He's delivered the warning as the situation has become desperate enough for Creon to seek his help, and now, when he realizes during the aggressive stichomythia between the two, he decides to move towards giving the nuclear option of prophecy. He tells Creon, "It will be galling to those who are touched by this fate that I should give the city its life-saving medicine." But he also knows how his prophecy will be received, and he's reticent to give it. The characterization of Tiresias is once again consistent with his previous stage appearances. He demonstrates that he's aware of the difficulty presented by what is the only option for saving the city, and that it will go directly against the wishes of those who've summoned him. He recognizes that it's not safe for him to divulge what he knows openly unless he's further petitioned. He threatens to leave and says, "If I must, I will suffer as one man among many what is to come. What can I do?" This is designed to either be a parting shot or a feint at leaving, which will result in Creon beseeching him to name the cure for the diseased land. Tiresias is not delivering all the prophetic knowledge he possesses unbidden and to Creon. So one interpretation that here he's testing Creon's commitment to the city. So Tiresias might be held to display arrogance and stubbornness. In the stichomythia between him and Creon, he certainly obfuscates. He tests the willingness of Creon to hear a cure for the city. The audience will have been waiting to hear what this terrible prediction he's withholding, especially since there was a tradition that his son, sometimes called Megarius, as in Sophocles' Antigone, had died because of something to do with Creon. When Eurydice is about to stab herself in that play, she calls down imprecations upon her husband, lamenting both Haemon and Megarius, who died before. Euripides himself produced a tragedy named Antigone concerning the aftermath of Polynices' siege, and may have referred to the sacrifice or suicide of Haemon's brother in that play too. And such precedents might have been on the audience's mind when, in Phoenician Women, Tiresias foreshadows. Oh no, sorry. Tiresias foreshadows the misery that his prophecy will reflect on Creon. "You wish it now, but soon you will not." He prevaricates further after the stichomythia, requesting the withdrawal of Menecus, either through sensitivity to the young man's reaction should he hear his doom prophesied, or because the prophet already knows how Creon will respond. So Creon, despite clearly enjoying thus far a reasonable relationship with Tiresias, fails to read between the lines, insisting that Menocius should stay and assuming that Tiresias is doubting the young man's discretion. He will be glad to hear of what will keep us safe. The prophet then directly reveals what needs to be done and asserts that it's Creon's duty to kill his child, since you have asked for your fate. This is almost a suggestion that things might have been different had Creon not asked, but then maybe it would not have been his child. Yet we know in tragedy that prophecy does not work that way, despite the implication that Tiresias is offering a warning rather than a fait accompli. The warning is, in effect, a demand for ultimate sacrifice. So Creon responds as leaders are frequently shown to respond. He's in denial. "I have not heard it, not listened, country be damned." Yet he clearly understands the implications for the city that his non-compliance will bring about. And Tiresias comments that he shies back, always being on the side of the city. He indicates that he's lost respect for Creon. The stichomythia follows again, positions the prophet and the father in well-matched opposition. There is a standoff in which Creon supplicates Tiresias, pleading with him to remain quiet about this prophecy in front of the citizens, and the prophet refuses. "I shall not be silent," despite his previous suggestion that it was not safe for him to do so. Then Creon asks directly why it falls to him and his son to save the city. Now that's in fact a reasonable question, since it seems that Euripides innovates here. Nowhere in the extant record attests that Ares' grudge, his ancient wrath, makes him demand restitution in the form of human sacrifice from Cadmus and his descendants for the slaughter of the earth-born snake. So the question temporarily diffuses the tension between the two men and gives the dramatist the opportunity to inform the audience of the mythological backstory that's led to the current situation. And this would be all the more necessary if it is, as it seems to be, Euripides' invention. So the curse goes right back to the founding of Thebes and Cadmus' killing of Ares' dragon, just as Tiresias is inextricably linked to the fate of the city and advocates it. Creon and his son are the only pure-blooded survivors of the men who arose from the dragon's teeth that Cadmus has sown. Menocius is not betrothed, therefore belongs exclusively to the city, and his actions prove his devotion to Thebes to be equal to that of Tiresias. He does indeed give his life. Tiresias directs his daughter to take him home, lamenting the life experience of prophets caught between men and gods, unable to please them both. So Euripides, we are coming to the end, I promise. Euripides here does not make Tiresias' language cryptic. He's distressed by his role as a mediator. Since Creon first expresses his doubts about his skill as a seer, and because he knows, as the audience are aware, what will transpire. So as in Antigone, Creon knows that Tiresias' prophecy will come true, although Tiresias tries to soften the blow by saying that others will carry out the sacrifice rather than Creon himself. So Tiresias has performed the role that's been his since the Nekia in the Odyssey, and that is to provide information on how the gods might be appeased. Although it could be suggested that the Tiresias of the Phoenician women is operating in closer alignment to the human dimension of the situation, because the one who must die is innocent. McKinn suggests that Tiresias speaks for himself in his play, that he wears a crown to bolster his authority, highlighting his godlike treatment from the Athenians, a role in which, as an intermediary between the gods, Tiresias is perhaps overstepping proper limits. And the audience will never be entirely sure that Menocius' death was a requirement of Thebes to remain standing, especially since the city had always survived in the previous literary tradition. So just very quickly to finish off, Oedipus innovates here, not only making changes in the mythology and the theology, but also in the figure of Tiresias. The audience is invited to remember the distrust in prophets that rulers show in other plays. And whilst we cannot be sure of the date of the composition of the Bacchae, it too makes further innovations in the portrayal of Tiresias. He's portrayed as an infirm old man, deeply human, barely an intermediary of the gods at all, and he becomes a figure of ridicule. And this portrayal would have been much more effective for those who'd witnessed Phoenician women, which places his abilities and his motives under scrutiny. So it's difficult to assess how the ancient audience might have reacted to his hyper-rational speech in the Bacchae, outlining the sensible reasons that Pentheus should either worship Dionysus or at least hold back from sneering derision. And Tiresias demonstrates knowledge of the future greatness of the god, but is also characterized as an accomplished rhetorician of the 5th century, which melds tragedy with both comedy and social commentary. So what we see with Euripides, very briefly, is an innovation in the character of Tiresias. And I always suggest to my students that when you're looking at mythology in Euripides, you need to check the mythology. He innovates all over the place, particularly with the role of Euripides. Thank you very much for listening. Let me get rid of my slides.